Kennedy.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. My first question would be, yesterday when we had at the opening ceremony, a lot of issues are interlinked with education. They have to do with water and sanitation. They have to do with keeping girls in school. And in Kenya, at one point, they said the reason for absenteeism in school is lack of sanitary towels for girls. If you were given a platform such as the African Union Leaders Meeting, what would your message be to African leaders? What would you want them to tackle immediately as a priority for defeating the odds that are inherent in this exercise of providing education for all?
You're talking about the parity issues and how we bridge it. And you're so right, because Donald, the president of the Africa Development Bank, mentioned it yesterday, the importance of access to water and sanitation. When I did a country visit to Tanzania, I visited a particular community where we supported a community-based water supply system. And the testimony that I got from the women was how that had now enabled their daughters to not have to go looking for water and fetching water and therefore not being in school. Then in northern Nigeria, the issue of access to sanitation is so important for a girl child to agree to come to school. Because if the public school system does not have it, because of the cultural and religious demands, the girl will not be in an environment where she cannot be assured that personal dignity. So these are very interesting interlinkages. What this therefore shows is that a sector-wide approach to planning education is important. You can't take education in isolation from the rest of the investment in public infrastructure. So whether it's access to community water, access to good roads, access to energy. As Minister of Education, I had access to food. In fact, I was going to come to nutrition issues. When I was Minister of Education, one of the things that I often heard from young children, when I did host a children's parliament on education, and some of the children said to me, the most important thing that we want you to do for us is to make the NEPA, that's what our children lock up, our power utility, they lock it in their mind as NEPA. So even though it had become power holding company, they still said, if I could get NEPA to work, said because, when we want to study so we can really pass our exams, there's no light. So you look at, how many of the schools in Africa have access to energy? That's an important element. So a comprehensive strategy for economic development is key. People should not just take one aspect and run with it. But what we're saying is that education is so fundamental to building a vibrant society, and a society that would be the human capital that would accelerate growth, that you can't say, okay, when I finish building all my infrastructure, then I'll face education. No, you can't say that. You've got to do it in a very integrated and in a very strategic kind of way. So, and what you said about food, I visited in Angola. When I did my visit to Angola, I went to a classroom. I was taken to a classroom in the outskirts of Luanda. And it was early morning. I remember this so well. It was first thing in the morning. And these little children, first I thought that the children were, they were younger than their age. So it was a case of stunting, the nutrition problems. So these children looked younger than their real age. Malnutrition was an issue. I touched some of their skin and it got an indentation. So, and that early morning, the children were sleeping. Some of them were sleeping in the class. They were not ready for learning. Why do you think that was the case? They were malnourished, they were hungry. So school feeding is an important element in keeping children in school. Empirically, we've proven that. That is why our nutrition program at the World Bank is an important element in our human development work. And then we are collaborating with UNICEF in pushing, and the World Food Program in pushing this agenda for school feeding as an important element in retaining, retention. It's one thing to enroll, it's another thing to retain. So it's a really integrated approach at ensuring this continuous build-up of the interest in education. But you're right, it's going to take a lot of political leadership. And the presence of the AU Commissioner for Human Resources and all of that is also an indication that we realize that the AU as a premier political institution must provide leadership for this agenda. So we, together with our collaborators, the Africa Development Bank and ADEA, knew that we needed to have the presence of the AU at this event.
Okay, just on a more political note, a lot of African diplomats and politicians, they speak about World Bank reform. You are a voice in the World Bank. What can your presence at that institution bring to Africa's education?
It's already bringing. It's already bringing, because as an African, as one who got, public education and was able to, through public education, get as far as I've gotten to in life, you can see that I'm a very, very vocal voice for education. I have said it several times. Every time I travel, I don't know, I'm not sure I heard that any of you is from Zambia. When I went to Zambia, I told the Zambians that they should imagine a Zambia without copper and instead begin to use whatever copper is given to them efficiently and effectively to invest in the development of their human capital. Because at the end of the day, copper or oil or gold or any of these commodities are non-renewable. Someday soon you will dig and find nothing. But if you have a very effective and efficient educational system and you invested in your human capital and gave your society such a good knowledge base, then they would become the ones creating the opportunities for economic growth. They would not just be waiting for the copper company to employ them. They would become the ones providing all kinds of opportunities for creating wealth. And so that notion that the continent must invest the best of its policy, the best of its resources in education is already something that the World Bank champions, and I am proud as an African to be a strong voice for it. Just as the president of the bank is, President Zolik, really puts a lot of emphasis on education. Particularly, he's looking at the issue of tertiary education, science and technology, research and development, and saying how will all this and the opportunities we have for exchange relationship between like China, Africa, Singapore. We have an exchange program with Singapore. That's the basis upon which we have Minister Tarman, for instance, come. We've taken now the third group of African ministers that went to Singapore to interact with the policymakers in Singaporean education and the rest of their sector. So those kinds of exchange programs are important. The bank facilitates that. My colleague, she was my colleague in cabinet in Nigeria, and she's my colleague at the World Bank. One of our managing directors, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, is a very strong voice for education. She's African, so you don't even need to be convinced on that one. this year, I think we probably did a total of, Kali will come back with the exact number for you, but we increased our investment in education, in addition to the FDI, of course, the FDI that we administer. Our own IDA investment in education increased from something like 400 and something million to about a little over $1 billion or a little less than $1 billion. I'm not quite sure which one it is. So that's an indication of how we're growing the investment in education. Does that satisfy your political question?